Joining me now to give us an update and some insight on this budget crisis is School President Dr. Gloria Gonzales-Dholakia. Good morning and thanks for coming on the Wolfcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Let's jump right into it. So can you explain to our student audience in short what is going on with the district budget cuts and why they're happening?
Absolutely. So what we're seeing right now, it really is a budget crisis for public education across the state of Texas. Really, it's across our nation, but we're seeing a lot of this focused in Texas. I'm sure many people have seen news articles from across the state where school districts are in this situation. And it comes down to our state not funding public education. Every student has an allotment that school districts are given per student, and that basic allotment hasn't increased since 2019. We also know since 2019, we've seen rapid inflation. We've seen inflation of like 22% in this area, but there's been no increase in that student allotment. On top of that, specific to Leander ISD, our legislature has reduced the amount of funding that they give for instructional materials. So for buying books, for buying different resources in the classroom, we lost $1.5 million in SHARS funding, which is funding that comes through that's specifically for students that are receiving special education. And on top of that, there's been new, what we call unfunded mandates. And what that means is our state said, here's some rules that y'all need to follow, but they're not funding them. Biggest one, for example, is safety and school policing. So we have to have an armed security at each campus. And the amount of money that they gave us to implement this was about $1.5 million a year. And the cost to us is over $4 million a year. So all of these things kind of cascading on top of each other are bringing us to this situation. And there's other pieces in there. There's other nuances in there. Another piece of that I should share with students is we get paid by attendance rates. Pre-COVID, we were at like 96% of students attending daily. Post-COVID, we're at about 94% of our students attending daily. For every percent that we drop, that costs the district about $3 million a year. So when you look at both of those together, all of those things together, it's significant.
All right. And so that makes sense, but what would you say to critics who are saying that the district isn't handling the budget well?
I would say that they should be paying attention to what's happening at our state level. For years, the district and school districts across the state have been raising the alarm that we're in a budget crisis, that our state legislatures need to start funding schools. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people really don't pay attention to these things until, and this isn't a knock on anyone, we're all busy, and I think when people really hear it, when they really feel it, is when it's impacting their campus. And so now it's impacting all of us. And so I think a lot of people are like, wait a second, I didn't know this was happening. What's going on? And so it is a complex piece. I'd say that our district, we have a very healthy fund balance. And for the last few years, we've been pulling from fund balance to make sure we could still do a lot of these things that were critical, and that's giving our staff a small pay increase every year, doing these pieces, but you can't pull from your fund balance every year. Otherwise, you won't have a fund balance left. And so, yeah.
How can students expect this to impact their experience in schools, and should they be worried?
I'll tell you from a school board perspective, as we're looking at these cuts, it's our goal to try to do these in a way that impacts students the least amount. But the reality is any cut like this, it will impact students, from having larger classroom sizes or to one of the things that we're also doing is looking at programs and which programs aren't being used as widely, which programs are not being used efficiently in the district. And so those will impact students. It's our goal to impact the least amount of students and also impacting in the least amount of hurt for our community.
All right, and what can students do?
I think the most impactful thing students can do right now is reach out to their elected officials at the state level. Right now, there's Senate Bill 2 that's going through, down at our Capitol, and we're lucky that we're close to our Capitol, right? For me to reach out to these legislators, it doesn't have the same impact as students and families reaching out. They need to start funding public education. They're sitting on a huge surplus of public education dollars, and they're not releasing it. And this bill is looking at releasing that to private schools. And so that would be our taxpayer public dollars going to private entities. The bill that's currently being moved through, that's already passed Senate, that we're waiting for House, gives more per private student than it does for each of our public school students. And so I think that's criminal, and that's something that we need parent and student voice. I think having students' voice in that conversation would have a significant impact.
All right, and then what was the school board's involvement in the decision regarding the budget cuts?
So the school board comes up what we call budget parameters. And what that means is we want our budget at the end of the day to be balanced, or we're willing to pull this much into, we're willing to go this much in the deficit and pull from our fund balance. So those are the parameters that the school board creates, and then administration goes and creates a plan to be able to hit those parameters. Next week, we're having a budget workshop meeting where we're really going to dig deep into that budget and talk through with administration. Tell me how you got to this point. Tell me why this program. Tell me how we're going to still provide the quality of classroom instruction that's critical to us while adjusting to these budget cuts.
Is there still anything that can be done to avoid these cuts, or is the plan announced by the superintendent final?
I don't think anything is 100% final. This will be the first time that the board, I'd say next week when we have our budget workshop, it'll be the first time that the board is talking through the cuts as a whole board. It's a hard line because I have to tell you, we know we have to cut. We know that there's going to be significant cuts, and nobody wants to make any of those cuts. And as a school board trustee, our job is to come up with the parameters, and our school administration creates that budget. But at a certain point, we all are going to have a discussion, and we're going to talk through what that looks like, and hope that things change. Right? We're going to hope that our Texas representatives step up and start funding, and that we can make significant adjustments. But the truth is, we hoped for that to last session, and we pulled from our fund balance significantly. And then that legislative session was over, and they gave no increase to education. And so we have to make a plan to move forward, given the parameters that are in place right now.
So why wasn't the school board a part of this discussion before?
Well, we were a part of the budget parameters, and our administration came up with this is the plan that goes forward. I'll tell you, honestly, I wish it would have been flipped. I wish there would have been a discussion, and that way, I think it's important for the community to hear the deliberation and the discussion. One of the programs that administration brought back to cut, which I'm sure everyone's heard about a lot, is the IB program. And our administration since then has given us a lot of information on here's the number of students that are, I think last year, for example, there was less than 50 students or around 50 students between two high schools that graduated with an IB degree. So they said, when we compare that to AP and AP capstone, it's significant. And I think those are discussions that are critical and important, but I also think it would have been helpful for us to have that discussion and the community to hear that discussion and that deliberation before those announcements came. But I will say the reason our administration had to do this in this way is timing. Our schools have to come up with staffing for next year, and that has to be done right around this time. So it was kind of a timing crunch of the way everything flowed. Not my preference, but it just was a timing issue.
So you mentioned the IB program. What does the future of the IB program look like in the district and for students that are currently enrolled?
So right now, I know what administration has proposed is our juniors that are in high school would complete IB for next year, but they wouldn't start any students as juniors next year. And so it would complete, so students that are currently 1 year into the program would still be able to complete that program, but there wouldn't be any new IB students. That's the current proposal that's out there, and one of the other discussions we had at our last school board meeting was talking about AP capstone and being able to put that program into all of those schools, so there would be different types of programs that create like those small cohorts and create that community for students on those campuses.
How is the district deciding which programs and positions are being considered for cuts?
So that's a big piece that our administration went through that process together, and based on the parameters that the school board gave them. And at our next school board meeting where we do the budget workshop, they're going to go through each of those cuts and kind of talk through the data around those and how they got to that piece.
And the sudden nature of this announcement may have created confusion and concern within the community. How do you feel about the way this news was rolled out by the district? I think it's hard news, right? And honestly, I think I'm a little conflicted. I think that it's important for us to be transparent and to be honest with people and give them as much notice as possible. And I think that's what our administration was trying to do. Dr. Gehring, he'll tell you, he'll say this a lot, like clear is kind. And we need to be clear as our campuses are working through staff allotments for next year. They need to have as much information as possible. And so I appreciate those pieces. I also think that a community conversation with the board, like this budget workshop that we're about to have, I would have loved for us to do that and hear that deliberation, talk to my other board members, and in this forum, so that everyone could kind of hear this deliberation and hear what our administration is proposing and why before the rollout. What is the board doing to address staff and community concerns and ensure they feel heard in this process? Right now, a lot of it is just listening, listening to our community, listening to staff, and trying to educate people on the why we're in this position. Right now, our power that we have left is our voice to advocate, and we are a school district that's really close to the Capitol. And so I think that we have a responsibility in our community to use that to our advantage, and this is where we need parent and student voice advocating for public schools.
Awesome. And then really, what's next?
What's next is, I think having really transparent conversations about what is the future of education for Texas, what's the future of education for Leander ISD. What's important to us is students first. Students first in every conversation that we have, and making sure that we can continue to create an environment where our students can thrive, and supporting our teachers and our educators to do that in any way possible.
All right, and is there anything else you'd like to add or say?
This weekend is a rally at the Capitol supporting public education. It encourages many people that can get down there to advocate for public education. And if you can't do that, I think what's even more valuable is reach out to your elected officials and let them know about let them know your experience in public education and what these cuts mean to you.
Awesome, and thank you again for joining us. We look forward to talking to you again soon, and we appreciate all you do for LISD. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thank you.